Ladies and gentlemen, our acid influx... Oh no, it's acid reflux. The recent influx of OLED monitors has not stopped, because today we have a brand new one from Samsung. It's the Odyssey G6, but this is the G60SF. They basically update them more or less every year. Similar model names, which is great and annoying at the same time, but this is the latest one, and fundamentally this has one of the latest QD OLED panels with a whopping 500 Hz of refresh rate. And I must admit that I really do find it quite comical at this stage, how everyone's trying to outdo each other by like 10, 20 Hz. It was 480. Now it's 500, and you've got Asus touting like 720p, 720 Hz, which, let's be honest, is pretty pointless. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you want a super fast gaming monitor, there are quite a few to choose from. And throughout this video, we are going to be explaining whether this from Samsung is the one to go for. And of course, I don't think we have a better resting surface than the PC-centric mouse mat, now in its final clearance sale from $9.99 plus shipping. You can find that link down below. But let's go ahead and drop this down. And then of course we can assemble our stand and then just gently line this up till it clicks into position. And then, ladies and gentlemen, there we have our Odyssey G60SF. A lot of stuff to talk about, and I'm incredibly excited, as I'm sure you are, for this video sponsor.
MSI's Black Friday deals are here, and now is the time to save big on PC gaming goodies. There's loads of deals at your favourite stores, with huge savings on award-winning QD OLED monitors, Intel and AMD motherboards, cases, and all-in-one liquid coolers. Not only that, but these deals stack with existing offers, including up to £100 of Steam Wallet credit whenever you buy a qualifying MSI product. Save big today with MSI, just hit that link down below.
Rightio then, folks, and welcome back to the G6. And the first thing that you need to know about this, other than the fact that obviously this is 1440p, 500 Hz, 27-inch in terms of form factor, but it very much is that matte finish. You can see it really quite obviously here. You've still got that kind of purpley effect that you do get on QD OLEDs. Once again, worth reiterating, this always looks way worse on camera. I see people in the comments going,
"No, don't buy that, it's absolutely terrible, just look at the video."
That is true, but that is at extreme angles. I mean, who actually looks at their monitor like that? You're gonna look at it like this, and then obviously the raised purples that you can get are pretty much non-existent. We could bring up the shadows to exaggerate it, but I assure you in real life, it's not really something that you're gonna notice. But definitely what is the way that it handles the reflections. So in a room like this, where there's actually quite strong light sources whenever we're filming, obviously this definitely could be quite useful, but it does come at the cost of a slight penalty to image quality, because obviously by adding the extra coating between the panel and your eyes, there's something else in the way. It's a little bit like looking out of a window and just putting like a, well, matte coating there. Like, it might help, but it is slightly gonna compromise your image quality. So each their own. I'm not gonna tell you which way you should go, but I will say that personally, I'd rather go for a glossy and control my light sources, but it depends on the room. Sometimes you just literally can't do this. I mean, actually, I think the best way for me to properly show this off is to grab a different monitor. So this is also using a QD OLED panel. This one's a little bit older, actually. But you can see that this does not have like the Samsung finish applied to it. So there's definitely gonna be some differences. The main one is gonna be obviously the way that it handles the reflection. So if we angle both of these, look, directly to the same light source, there it is. Absolutely massive difference. Do you see that? That is about as apples to apples as we can get. And they both have that kind of like purpley tinge to it, but the way it's spread out on screen is completely different. So don't go thinking that if you go for a matte panel, as you can see, all of the reflections will just disappear. They just kind of diffuse a lot more. And as I say, want to reiterate, this is our main studio light. This is not realistic, but obviously if you're using this in a room that has bright sunny windows all down the side of your room, then you could argue that this would probably be a better shout. And obviously as well, if you're one of those people that has slatted blinds, you always get like a little bit of light leak that comes through them. Once again, that could be better for a matte panel because it will spread them out. Whereas if you go for this, well, it does pick up your reflection, but you can just see just how much glossier that is and how much contrastier and punchier that is compared to the matte finish. So I definitely do find it a little bit peculiar that LG and Samsung are going down this route, especially bear in mind Samsung Display obviously have this finish, and then Samsung monitors are applying their own finish to it. But again, it gives you the option. And it's at this stage that we'd normally cut straight ahead to the image quality, start looking at the 500 Hz, which obviously we are gonna do. But if you're looking at this monitor, especially at the time of filming, you need to be absolutely aware that the main difference between this and arguably its closest rival, which is one from MSI, they use the same 500 Hz QD OLED panel, but this one has the matte finish. But then crucially, at the time of filming, this one's more expensive by around about £100 here in the UK. So if you can't already tell from the tone of my voice, I do find this quite disappointing, but at least we do have two full HDMI 2.1s alongside the DisplayPort 1.4, headphone jack, USB hub, and two USB-As. On the plus side though, at least it does come with a power brick, which means that you can have a nice long cable, so you don't have to be really close to your AC outlet, which most monitors do, and it drives me up the wall. Quite literally, because you're chasing the cable up the wall!
Oh, PC Centric, you get angry too easy.
Yeah, that's what everyone says. And we've got this turned on, so here we are then, our first look at our G6, and this is 1440p, so the image clarity is obviously not going to have as much pop as you have with 4K, but definitely that coating, it's doing a very good job of not having any reflections. I can see you are looking at something completely different to gloss. I mean, one of the benefits really that you'll find with a glossy monitor is it just kind of makes everything look a little bit sharper, even if it isn't. I mean, even that cheaper AOC monitor that I was testing yesterday still looked absolutely amazing out of the box, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this doesn't, but you can definitely notice the step down really in terms of image quality. I don't want to be that person that just goes gloss, 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 but when you have the two side by side, personally, I do think that it is quite obvious. But let's go ahead, oh, I think it's already done it, and set this to the full 500 Hertz. Oh, almost 499.5. We're being shortchanged. Oh, but say what you will about matte versus glossy, there is no denying that that just feels absolutely insane in terms of responsiveness. Like, there is absolutely no perceivable lag whatsoever when you're moving that around. That really is astounding. I mean, obviously you've got pros and cons to having high refresh rate versus high resolution. We're still not living in a world where you can have 500 Hertz of 4K, I'm sure that day will come. So you're gonna have to obviously pick between them. But bear in mind, most people are probably after a 27-inch monitor. They're gonna have a PC that's gonna be very capable, but not necessarily at driving 4K at above 200 frames a second anyway. Whereas if you go for 1440p, you'll find that it is easier to drive, at least for your GPU. Don't forget that obviously you're gonna need a very powerful CPU, so realistically, you're looking at an AMD X3D for the best results with this. But once again, it obviously depends on the games that you're going to be playing. We do our testing with an RTX 5080 here. You get better results with a 5090 or a 4090, but this is still very, very overkill, so I think it's pretty real world for people that will buy this monitor. But right, let's jump straight into one of our major tests, shall we? They've either updated this or it's just different today, because now we have these little like warning signs as well. But that is so clear, that is ridiculous. I'm gonna come around actually so I can see this properly. And it honestly is absolutely crazy. I know that this doesn't properly come across on video. We'll try and show you some overlays where we slow it down. But normally when you look at something like this, you just have so much trailing and it's hard for your eyes just to keep track of. But when you look at it on a 500 Hertz display, it is basically, I don't want to say a photograph, but it really is not that far off whatsoever. There is no visible trailing whatsoever. It is just on those eyes where you can see the tiniest amount of blur. And obviously, if you are going to be playing a game like CS and you're very, very competitive and fundamentally you're very good at the game as well, then obviously the more FPS that you can pump into this, the more you can use it, the more real world benefit you're going to see. I think for most people, anything above 165 Hertz is probably not going to make a massive difference to you. 240 to 360, I think that's probably the hard limit personally for most gamers, even if you're quite good, and it's when you go above 360 Hertz, that's basically proper professionals only that will really be able to get like the most out of it and unlock the biggest difference, but obviously it's always nice to have. I am also going to say that perhaps a little bit unusually, for me at least, I know someone else has used this, but out of the box it does look a little bit on the cooler side, whereas setting it to warm too definitely looks nicer to my eyes and kind of looks a bit more normal as well. Yeah, I do find that a bit odd actually. Standard and cool definitely seem a little bit too cool, so I'm going to leave this on warm too. But right everyone, let's get into the meat of it. Enough guff, let's start gaming. I'm going to start with some Battlefield 6, and I've set this to pretty much low across the board, but we've kept textures to ultra because it's not really going to make much difference, because obviously we want to get as close to 500 FPS as possible. So if you look at the top right corner of your screen, this is what you can expect with this combination. So even if you did have an RTX 5090. If you look at that CPU, so this is with a 7800 X3D, you could go to a 9800 X3D and get even more performance, of course. But with a 7800 X3D, you can see we're getting around about 250 frames a second, but our GPU is able to beat that at around about 290. So there is no way you were getting 500 FPS in this unless you're using some like CPU from the future paired with, well, maybe an overclock 5090, but even then I think that would be quite the push. But having said that, I mean, actually Battlefield 6 is still a very good looking game even with pretty much everything set to low, but I suppose a lot of that is down to the textures as well. But there's no doubt about it that when you move the mouse around, that is just crystal clear. It is quite something, it really, really is. And I will say as well, actually, that whilst like in the desktop where you have like quite a lot of similar shades, you notice the coating a lot more. As soon as you're actually moving around, then you really can start to appreciate the matte coating a little bit more, because obviously we're not getting those reflections and we're not able to kind of pick up like the weird kind of, it's almost like a snow haze effect that you do sometimes get on matte coatings. You don't really notice that when you're in a game. It's just more very, very light backgrounds and consistent light backgrounds. So yeah, I've got to say, suddenly, this is a lot more impressive, and that 1440p resolution, even with DLSS set to balance at 1440p, still looks really, really good. I don't think anyone's going to be complaining that this isn't sharp enough. But let's see if we can actually translate some of this monitor performance into some action, and there is one contested, 3 to go. Come on, Centric, that's 2. Oh! 3! But not 4. But right, let's try with a sniper and see if that's any different. And I've got to say, I'm still pretty blown away actually, not only by the image quality here, because obviously this is OLED, so you are getting just superior color accuracy really, despite the fact that I obviously did have to set that to warm too, but I'd always advise kind of calibrating it if you do have the equipment, obviously for the best result, but otherwise it is pretty much personal preference really if you're not using it for color critical applications. But I've got to say, I am used to using 165 Hz OLED at the moment, and you can definitely notice that this is that little bit smoother, despite the fact that, you know, it's not a crazy difference, but I suppose it is an extra 100 frames a second that we are currently pumping in here. I mean, obviously it's not quite as sharp, even with DLSS upscaling to 4K, that is going to look that little bit better. It's a 32-inch screen that I use, so again, that definitely helps. But actually, I think if I was just going to have one monitor and I purely was going to use it for just multiplayer gaming, then I think this would actually be a much better bet. It pretty much comes down to what you use your monitor for, really. I mean, I obviously am
a creative.
I create stuff with my screen, so if you're creating 4K videos, clearly a 4K monitor is going to be better for you. And likewise, if you watch a lot of movies or you do kind of use all of the pixels that you have at your disposal, or you have an RTX 5090 and you kind of want to get the absolute most out of it, then obviously that's when it is going to make a whole bunch of sense. But actually, I do think for multiplayer gaming, clearly the appeal of 1440p but up to 500 FPS is definitely going to be pretty strong on this monitor. So okay then, yeah, actually for what this monitor is primarily meant for, which is multiplayer gaming, I am actually pretty darn impressed. But let's see how this copes with HDR. And I think one of the best games, actually, jumping straight into the deep end, to actually show off some HDR on an OLED is going to be this, Returnal, because OLED traditionally isn't necessarily the best when it comes to raw brightness, but is when it just comes to kind of contrast and having bright highlights in combination with obviously a lot of dark areas without the blooming that you'd usually get with like a mini LED display. We've got a load of zones and you kind of just have a little bit of light leak around them. Now, I will say at the moment that this definitely looks good, but it doesn't look all that HDR. There's not that much brightness in the bright areas. You've still got all of the contrast that you'd have with OLED, and it still looks very good, but if this was it, frankly, I'd be a little bit disappointed. Now, the reason for this is because if you go into the menu, and I do find that the menu system on Samsung monitors is a little bit frustrating because it's really well laid out. It's easy to kind of find the setting that you want. It's so responsive. It's one of the best. It's got a four-way selector, fantastic. But I don't think they make it particularly beginner friendly because the setting that we're looking for is buried so far down in the menus. I mean, look, I'll show you. You've got to go into picture, and then you've got brightness, contrast, sharpness, contrast enhancer, which we've got set to high, HDR tone mapping, active or static. But the one that makes the biggest difference and the one that you need to turn on is down here where it says to peak brightness, and you've got a choice of off, medium or high. Don't really understand why anyone would want anything other than high. That makes such a big difference. Look at our image, look at this light source here, and then boom, just by turning this on, everything is just suddenly a whole lot brighter really. It looks way, way better, and I just don't understand why this wouldn't be the default really. I guess it is technically down to kind of hitting that standard that they're aiming for, which is probably display HDR true black 400, could be 500, or leave the note down there. But to be honest, for most people, those are going to be exactly the same. If you do want to have areas like this, which give you so much contrast, but fundamentally so much extra peak brightness and really does kind of give you that HDR experience, then that is the setting that you need to turn on, because now it kind of just like completely transforms the way that this game looks. I mean, all of the brights are just that little bit brighter, and when you do get kind of small areas of the image that can get kind of hit by light, so you have certain hotspots, it's just got a lot more pop really to the image. I think this is an absolutely fantastic looking display. Is it as good, and this is the main thing that you're going to have to consider, is this as good as the new tandem displays that you can get from LG Display W-OLED? Absolutely not. It's not bad, okay? This was only a few months ago pretty much one of the best, if not the best panels you could get. But especially when you combine it with a 27-inch form factor, it doesn't have that kind of wow factor that you can either get from size and immersion on something like a super ultra wide or even just a normal ultra wide display. But then it doesn't have that peak brightness that you're going to get with the Tandem OLEDs. That absolutely blew my mind. And if you do want to see a full review on one of those monitors, you can find it in the top right corner of your screen. But that got to a peak brightness of around about 1400 nits, whereas I can tell just by eye that this is not getting close to 1400 nits. Again, it's still good, and I don't think it's really gonna put anyone off that's specifically buying this for kind of its use case, which is the full 500 hertz like ultimate multiplayer gaming. But if you are buying this as a jack of all trades, then you got to wonder, if you're going to be doing HDR gaming, then surely you want to go for a Tandem OLED that is just a lot more jack of all trades, because it can still do high refresh rate, but can just get so much brighter in HDR. But right, ladies and gentlemen, as I'm sure avid viewers of the channel will know by now, there can be only one game to properly test consistently HDR performance, and this is going to be this game, which is Horizon Forbidden West. And actually, I've got to say, this is still very, very impressive. This is not the Tandem OLED level, but this is still a mighty fine display. There is loads of contrast here, and especially in a scene like this, once again, where you've got a lot of contrast. So you've got these kind of dark areas and loads of light kind of pooling here, and I genuinely do feel like that's kind of quite bright in my face. You can get a real impression actually of just how bright this monitor can be. This is looking really, really good. I've got to say actually, the colors as well on this QD OLED panel are really, really impressive. I mean, maybe it's a little bit oversaturated actually compared to some of the others that I've used, but obviously you can always tune this down if you want. There's quite a lot of stuff, as we've shown you, a lot of settings and things that you can change to get this looking how you want. But if you're kind of after that real punchy image that's, I don't want to say TV shop with everything like turned up to the max, it's not quite there, but it definitely is very much on the punchy side. So for anyone that does want this and wants loads of impact, actually you're absolutely getting that. And whilst this fire isn't as bright on some of the other OLED TVs, and as I say, the Tandem OLED, it's still really, really good looking. I mean, compared to the early first generation of OLEDs, this is pretty much night and day. So whilst it is very much a progression rather than a revolution like we saw with Tandem, it is still very, very impressive. So yeah, this absolutely is a jack of all trades monitor, and specifically if you are after one of those matte panels, then I can see the appeal here. Let's cut to the other camera. Because honestly guys, I think I need a little bit more space to do this, because I just find that this is almost a little bit frustrating. And this monitor, I think, is the primary reason why I don't do review scores, because I would probably say that this is like an 8.5, maybe a 9. So 4 stars, but then 4 stars sounds mean. There's not really that much that's wrong with this, and as long as you change that peak brightness, you're going to absolutely love it, especially if fundamentally you mainly play multiplayer games. You can get as close to 500 frames a second as possible. You're going to take full advantage of it. It's going to be awesome. But as I say, the issue is not actually this monitor itself per se, as long as obviously you want a matte finish rather than the glossy. It is just down to what's around it. So if you're willing to kind of step down and you'd rather have extra brightness, save yourself a little bit of money, then you can buy a gigabyte version that's W-OLED that has that Tandem OLED panel. That costs less money. It's around about £500, rather than this is like £700 or so at the time of filming. That obviously will get a lot brighter, still has a matte finish, it's still 1440p, and okay, I think that's 280 hertz rather than 500. But as we saw when we were playing Battlefield 6, if that's the game that you're playing, if you can't pump in 500 frames a second, or you can't pump above 200 frames a second, then this isn't really going to be fundamentally different. And the fact as well that obviously if you're in this camp and you want to save even more money, you can buy one of the first gen OLEDs that obviously aren't as bright in SDR and HDR, but fundamentally for multiplayer, it's still going to give you a very similar experience, even though they're 1440p, 200 frames a second. You can get those for under £400 now. Absolute steal, and all of that extra money could go towards a better graphics card where you could actually pump more FPS in the first place. And then obviously you can go the other way around as well, and you can spend even more money and you can buy the Asus version of their Tandem that does the 720p at 720 frames a second, but realistically is going to be 1440p, 540 frames a second, so even faster than this. But then you also get the advantage of having that tandem, you get the glossy or the Asus true black glossy finish, but obviously you get the extra brights and highlights from having that Tandem OLED panel. So this kind of fits a little bit in the middle really, but if you wanted this specific thing, then all the time the MSI version is quite a bit cheaper. Then unless you really want that matte finish, I find that this is a little bit of a difficult one to actively recommend. Again, not on merit, purely just on price, because unless there's something about this, which is going to be that HDR10 Plus or the matte coating, then the MSI is just technically better. So for most people, as I say, you're not really going to notice that much of a difference. If this was cheaper than the MSI, £50, £100, then this is when it would be really, really easy to recommend and you can get the most out of it. But once again, it purely just comes down to price. I hope that's clear. You see what I mean? Review score of this would be like an 8.5. The MSI might be a 9, but realistically, it just comes down to price, availability, and obviously just getting most for your money, really. And this is probably a great time to say that if you're still a little bit confused, you don't know what the best monitor is going to be for you, or you want to learn a little bit more about OLED, you can find our full monitor review roundup where we go through the very best of 2025 through to 2026. Then you can find this video in the top right corner of your screen. But I really hope that this video has been useful. Hit the like button if it has, get yourself subscribed, and of course, if you do want to check out current pricing on anything that was featured in this video, alongside all of the other recommendations that we have when it comes to OLED monitors, you can find these linked down below.
And while you're down there, why not save big with MSI's Black Friday deals? With offers ending on December 2nd, you've got to be quick. There's huge savings on monitors, including QD OLED, as well as deals on cases, coolers, motherboards, and more. Not to mention that these stack with existing offers with up to £100 of Steam Wallet credit whenever you buy a qualifying component. Get your deal of the day today with MSI, linked down below.
A massive thank you to you guys for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.